Thank you so much for joining us today at this beautiful Trans Day of Visibility 2020 for our talk, Designing for Trans and Gender Non-Conforming Folks. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to have Maddalena Mack, Senior National Director of Startup Bus, talk about her transition journey. We're going to have Max Measure, Senior Product Designer and Inclusion Consultant, who will talk about their experience with gender and ID. We'll have Jess Mons from D-Scout, who's a Director of Business Intelligence there, give us the case study of how D-Scout implemented a gender question in their forms. And lastly, myself, Sabrina Fonseca, I'm the Director of Design Strategy at Partners. I'll be sharing some best practices around gender inclusion in design. And I would like to give you a few tips on how to use Zoom. So this call will be mostly moderated through chat. We're going to have, you can use the chat by hovering around your Zoom meeting and then finding that bar at the bottom. You will see a little chat icon, which will open this panel, and you can just send your questions. I see that some folks are already posting in there. There's some activity. So that's pretty cool. I would like also to get a sense of who everyone is and what they're up to here in this talk. So I'm going to release a poll. So a little pop-up window should pop out, and it will give you four questions about your pronouns, about your role in your organization. What do you know about trans and gender non-conforming folks, and what would you like to learn today? And in the meantime, as you answer this, I would like to remind us all of our code of conduct. So we value respectful behavior. Please be considerate, kind, and constructive. Avoid excluding and harassing speech and imagery. Avoid making assumptions, including around pronouns. Should you catch yourself behaving disrespectfully or be confronted as such, stop and apologize. If you see disrespectful behavior, please message Ashley Axios in the chat feature to raise it for the moderator. So Ashley should be is one of the participants. You should be able to see her in that panel. You can open your chat and also select to send a message only to her, to flag anything if you'd like. And the moderator will also flag disrespectful behavior when observed, that is me. And those who persist or flagrantly violate the code of conduct will be removed immediately. So I'm pretty sure everybody here is amazing, but in case there's always a misunderstanding with this type of stuff, and it's totally fine. So that's what our code of conduct is here for, and also to protect everyone from any trolling. So we're going to avoid that. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the poll here. Seems like people are still responding, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. And in the meantime, I want to show you that you can connect with us on Twitter during and after this webcast. Here's our Twitter handles, and you can also use these hashtags to tweet along the talk if you'd like. And what else? I see that people are still responding. I'm going to give a minute before I close the poll.
There's still people joining in too.
Yes. So Sarah has asked if it's okay to share screenshots from this talk on Twitter. And please go back one slide with the hashtags for a second. Yes, of course. Yes, you can share screenshots. We're going to be releasing this as this deck later on for everybody to enjoy. And but you're welcome to take screenshots. Thank you for asking. Okay, I think Christina asked if this conversation will be recorded. Yes, it will be recorded. It will be published at some point. Also, I want to remind you all that one of the reasons why we're having this talk here today is our group met last year when one of our members, Maddalena Mack, decided to organize a panel around designing for trans and gender non-conforming folks. So we presented a first iteration of this talk last year, and then we submitted this same talk to Code for America Summit, which was going to happen in March, but because of the coronavirus pandemic, the Code for America was canceled. So we decided to do this talk anyway, and this allowed us to even pick the day for it. So it's very exciting to be doing this on Trans Day of Visibility. So super excited about that. And cool, let me close the poll now and let's look at some results. I see that we have a ton of people. Quite a few have voted. So super exciting, lots of designers. I'm gonna share the results right now. Nice to see some variety of pronouns here. It's very cool. And some user researchers, secondarily, lots of designers. See that a majority of people have been reading about it, and people are mostly interested in tips on how to design for trans and gender non-conforming folks, secondarily, how to be a better ally, and understand trans and gender non-conforming people in their lives better. So those are the three big themes. So thank you so much for sharing. I would like to invite you all to also share your pronouns as part of your Zoom name, so we can refer to you more easily. So if you go on the participants panel, or you can hover over your own name and click rename, or you can go into the little cameras if you're showing up on a camera, and hit the 3 dots icon, and a drop-down menu will show up, and you will have rename, and then you can add your pronouns to your name. I'm seeing that a bunch of people are on it already. I really appreciate that. If you don't figure out a way to add that, that's okay. If it comes to that, I will ask you. Very cool. So I want to hand it over to Max to talk about to give us a few ground rules on language before we start our conversation.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my own screen. It's the same presentation, but then I can skip slides more easily. Okay. Okay. So when we started making that panel all together, we were very excited to share tips and how to be a better ally and how to design for trans and gender non-conforming folks. And we like almost forgot, like, wait, maybe we need like to take a step back first and like be on the same page with a bit of vocabulary and terms. So first of all, the main, oops, sorry, wait, it's going too fast. Okay, so the main question, the main issue we hear a lot is the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. And this is a big concept to understand first. Those two are not the same at all. The gender identity is who we are, how we feel like we are ourselves. And the sexual orientation is who we like, so who we are attracted to, so it's external. So gender identity is internal and sexual orientation is external. And then the difference between transgender and cisgender is pretty simple. A transgender person is someone who their gender identity does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. And that, let's say, for me, I was assigned a girl at birth, and I lived and was raised as a girl and socialized as a woman, and I came out as a trans person just 3 years ago, just almost to the date, when I finally understood who I was, and at this one I understood that the gender identity, my gender identity does not align with the sex I was assigned at birth. I feel non-binary masculine, while my sex assigned at birth was female. And cisgender person is someone who their gender identity aligned with the sex they were assigned at birth. And it can change. You can realize, some like me very late in life, that after all, you don't align with the sex you were assigned at birth. So we use transgender or trans, and we use cisgender or cis, and we might use a bit of that today. So we wanted to make sure that's something that was shared with everyone. And binary pronouns, non-binary pronouns, you already, for some of you, decided to change your name on the Zoom call, and I really appreciate that. I think it's a very powerful way to encourage inclusion when you're going to be on other Zoom calls in the future. You know the binary pronouns, she, her, he, him, and you have the non-binary pronouns, they, them, ze, here. There's a lot of non-binary pronouns, and we won't go through that today because that's not the topic, but that's something that there's a lot of articles you can read about and get more used to non-binary pronouns. So one thing we wanted to do for you to start using a bit the chat and to meet each other, we won't be able to go through everyone talking on videos, but we wanted to show you how to use an inclusive introduction. And that's something that we hope can be used more and more in the workplace and around us. So I'm gonna do an example with Maddalena. So I would say, hey, my name is Max. I use the pronouns they, them. Which pronouns do you use?
Yeah, well, my name's Maddalena, and I use pronouns she, her. Thanks for asking me, Max.
So it's a bit weird at the beginning when you never did it, but we encourage you to try a bit around you. And we would like for you today to type on the chat your name and pronouns as a way to enter in the community that we are today in that webcast. And then I'll
let's stick. Let's stick on that slide, on Maddalena slide, and I will give. I want to make an introduction, and then we can switch over to Maddalena.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I want to thank you, Max. Max was one of the amazing people that I met as part of the designing for trans and gender non-conforming people panel that we presented last year. Maddalena was the person who organized that panel. It was a very interesting, it was a very interesting first contact because she contacted many of us from her research on the topic, and she saw my article and contacted me and organized and did all this work to organize this amazing panel. And it was something that I really haven't seen before. So many people, so many designers were interested and had work on this topic and like coming together. So it was a really amazing experience that she organized. She is part of the programming board at Startout New York. Startout New York is the organization that sponsored our first talk about this. And she is a senior national director at Startup Bus. Again, pronounced she, her. And Maddalena is going to go over her a journey map that describes her personal experience with transition, which was something that we learned a lot from hearing her story. So go for it, Maddalena. Maddalena, you're on mute.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Sabrina. Thanks for the great introduction, by the way. It's such an honor to be meeting all of you and have been working together on this amazing cause for the past half a year. So yeah, it's my honor to do this, and we wish to do more of this kind of seminars in the future for more in-depth topics as well. So yeah, good afternoon from New York, and good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. And thanks for joining us. And I'm going to go through my transgender transition journey and also the general methodology of like researching for the transgender and gender non-conforming folks. So something that I think this is an idea that came up during the past few months when we were trying to prepare for the talk for Code for America. And one thing we realized is that there's a lot of stories and accounts written about transgender and gender non-conforming people, but not a lot of like actual like UX research has done on that, like on our group, on our community. And it will be, for us, this seems really interesting to us because we are all like user experience designers and like applying what we have been doing for our users and customers back on our own community. It is quite a breakthrough, and like we're very excited to work on this together. So I just noticed that like more than 2/3 of us here are designers or user researchers. And I'm sure you know what this is. This is what we call, usually it's called customer journey map, but we are no customers here, so we are all humans here. So this is a human journey map. And what this kind of maps are usually used is great for visualizing a process of a person goes through to reach their goal. And in this case, our goal is to live authentically as a transgender or gender non-conforming person. And this kind of map is really helpful in a way that it's great for any point of a design process at any point. And it helps pinpoint the ups and downs, like what are the touch points that causes pain or touch points that causes joy. And it helps identify all these things very clearly at a glance. And it is really useful for that reason. So we mapped the journeys of 3 of our panelists. So we met myself, we mapped Max, we met Jess as well. And what we noticed, like even though there's just 3 of us, like what we noticed is that everyone's journey is very different. They vary a lot in terms of like the time span, the amount of steps required, the amount of goals that we have, the amount of joy, and the amount of pain. And there are a few key things like economic constraints, our class, the level of social acceptance of our growing up environment can play a big role to make a lot of difference in how our journey plays out. But then there are also some similarities that we observed initially. And we'd love to do more like research on this. so that, you know, we can get a clearer picture of what like a transgender and like gender non-conforming, like non-binary journey looks like. Some similarities, most notably, and of course, is when we identify as who we are, it brings us the most joy. So that's something to keep in mind. And there's a lot of touch points here that I'm going to show you that you see it will like helps us identify as who we are, and it really gives me the high points in my life journey. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about my journey. And obviously everybody's journey is different, as I mentioned, and it's not conclusive, you know, it's not a representation of how every transgender or gender non-binary person's life is like. So you know, for me, when I account for my own journey, I start from my very, very beginning, what it was like in my childhood, like decades ago. And I think childhood, you know, everyone, all of us have gone through childhood, and there's something really innocent about childhood, is that joy and pain are very visceral and very, it's something that we feel innately, you know, it's not something that needs to be described or like analyzed. And when I was a child, I was drawn to strong female figures in my family. You know, I was drawn to the strong female figures in my school, you know, on in mass media in my neighborhood, and it gives me this curiosity of what femininity is really about, and I want to really learn more about it. And really it gives me this kind of joy trying to learn more about it and try to look up to these people. But at the same time, on the other hand, I also study in a Catholic boys' school, and it's not the right environment for my type of personality. I was surrounded by a community that did not share my interests. It does not share who I identify as. And when puberty comes, as I learn more about what traditional male roles are about, those are the conflicting emotions that draws me down. So that's the initial stage, and we call that realization. The next step is like what we call exploration. So after becoming aware of my true identity, what it might be, and now I want to learn more about what this is about. You know, 2 decades ago, you know, only, I think, like, as I recall, like only within the past decade, we finally have like a real, like a social awakening and a social understanding, more social understanding of what transgenderism and gender non-binary is about. I mean, I'm only like humbly myself, I didn't really learn much about like gender non-binary until say 7 years ago as well. So I had a lot to learn from my community and my peers as well. But 2 decades ago, it was a lot more confusing than that. You know, people were talking transsexualism, or like talking about cross-dressing or other concepts, and it's not exactly clear to me who I really want to be, because there's a lot of mixed message and the social acceptance was not as high. But even like the ability to discover about like transgender people on mass media and finding like resources and similar people on the internet, that was joy to me. It gives me happiness to realize that, oh, I'm not the only person and I'm not alone in this journey. And I want to learn more about how these people survive and how they live authentically as themselves. I try exploring privately myself, you know, try drawing myself, visualizing who I can be, dressing up, you know, buying stuff so that, you know, makeup, things like that, to appear more feminine. But the first big hit in terms of my emotion comes is when I start to have to face the society, right? When I cannot just be in my closet the entire time. I need to, that's my identity. I need to, it cannot exist in isolation. Well, I know that we are isolated in the house right now, but we need to be connected with other people as who we are. And I had, as I was going through my teenage phase, like that is the most important thing to me, is to define my identity. And when I start telling people who I might be, that's when I hit the brick wall and realized that it's really not socially acceptable in my communities around me at that moment. Bathroom is a huge problem, and the both bathroom bills and all that stuff makes things even more complicated. And those are the moments that it feels like it feels very confusing and very difficult. So that's as I embrace the reality of the situation, that's when the ups and downs starts happening. Going back and forth with my transition. Should I really go through this? Or is this just a fantasy? Things like that. And a couple of times being rejected by friends or like finding my community and going on. But at a certain point, I realized that there's no walking back away from this. Like, this is who I am. And slowly and steadily, I start taking more steps towards my transition. And at each step, it brings me happiness to be more identified as who I am. Starting with coming out with my therapist, telling them who I really am, like really confronting my own desires. And that's important because without like the proper transgender mental health care, there wouldn't be therapy for me to be able to like come to terms with myself. And after coming out with therapists, pick my new name, I choose and what my pronoun is, and learning more about the process of how to actually transition. And finally be able to come out to friends, and finally being able to come out to my family is very important. So the fourth stage that we realize is what we call actualization. And that's like taking solid steps towards like confirming my identity. I think one of the most important steps really is finding transgender healthcare. And in New York, there are a few places, the Gay Center and Colin Lord Health Community Health Center has been especially important to me. And I thank them, especially, they're even working right now around the clock to deliver the necessarily hormone like therapy medical needs for the community right now during our pandemic. So I really thank them for doing this. So Colin Lord Community Health Center. And that was a high point to me, knowing that there's a stronghold of community and there are a lot of people sharing the same belief. That's like really confirms who I am. And that is a great high point for me. The most difficult parts, as I become more and more confident in who I am, I become less dragged down by the things that used to drag me down. I mean, being that name, like called who my old name used to be, or being misgender, that means like being called a pronoun that does not identify with me, those still hit me for a few years. But now I know who I am and it doesn't hurt me as much. And there's a lot of all those little things. It's almost sometimes feels like there are 5,000 cuts, but knowing who I am helps strengthen me against those like pain. With that said, right, there are also other obstacles, and namely like immigration. When it comes to identity, literally what's on your identity card, those are the things that are very difficult to change. And the immigration services, the ID card, like issuance services, like say DMV or the Hong Kong passport, which is what I have. And all those things really complicate the matter. And Max is going to go through more about that later in our seminar. With that said, like even though there are glass ceilings, political pressures from from the the government, the president, or social pressures, and like it's difficult to save up all the money that I need for all the surgeries that I'm going to need, in the next few years. Even those are the big lows that I'm facing right now. The high, the fact that I can advocate for our community right here, right now, and the fact that I can explore who I am, and love the people who I love as who I am. Those are the best things happen to me. So, looking beyond the future, I hope it's a straight line all the way up, finding a good health insurance, getting my top surgery and all that stuff. And, hopefully have like a family and grow old. And those are the things that I look forward to. So with that said, I'm going to get the slides back to Sabrina. With that said, this is an ongoing project, so it's not just about my journey, it's about everybody's journey. And we want to really learn more about like the touch points, the pain points of like other transgender and non-conforming people from different races, different classes, the different areas where they live. And we would love you. We would love if you join us. Well, we love you too. We would love if you join us by clicking our Google form and sign up, and we will try to help make the journey map just like mine with you together. So thank you so much for listening, and thanks for being here. And I'm going to hand the microphone back to Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Maddalena. I've heard this journey a couple of times, and it never ceases to be humbling. And I love that story so much. Really appreciate you sharing it with all of us. I dropped the link to the Google form on the chat. We acknowledge that this is Maddalena's journey. And as we mapped, we're not going to go over Max's and Jess's journeys today, but their journeys have a bunch of other things that are completely different. And it really made us realize how different journeys for different people are. And there's so many other aspects that even across these three amazing people's journeys that we still didn't account for. So first, keep in mind that the journey that Maddalena went through is one of many, and that there's many, many other stories, and the more stories that you can include when you are in your design process, the better. And please, if you want us to help you map your trans and gender non-conforming journey, use this form, and we'll figure it out. Also, please, yes, feel free to share it on Twitter. That is totally cool. And we'll look through the responses. We will also share this journey as a Medium article, as Max is mentioning, as a Medium article, and along with Max's and Jess's journey. So each one of them is going to have a Medium article, and you'll be able to see what their different journeys were about. So thank you so much, Maddalena. I will give it over to Max. Max is another amazing human that I met at the Trans and Gender Non-Conforming design talk, and they're going to they were running Argo Collective, which was all about educating folks in corporate environments to better include trans and gender non-conforming people. So they have a lot of knowledge to share. And today, Max is going to share their journey going through an ID change for their name with government. Over to you, Max.
Okay, sorry, I was struggling with my sharing. Yes, thank you for the introduction, Sabrina. I'm so grateful that we all met, all of us. I feel like I never really shared that deep into my own journey as being a trans person. I'm usually the one on the stage and helping other people to be more aware about trans lives and how they can take steps to improve their trans inclusion in their product and design. And today, because of the Trans Day of Visibility, I also wanted to share a bit more about some of the struggle I went through and a lot of my trans peers and gender non-conforming friends and community is going through. So my particular case is I wanted to share about how the battle it was for me to change my name. We talk a lot about the body if we decide to have some medical transition, and again, you don't have to go through any medical transition if you're trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming person. I made the decision to have some hormones using testosterone. A lot of trans folks don't, and everyone is valid. And we talk a lot about that, about how you physically change if you decide to physically change. And we almost never really talk about the emotional labor and the difficulty to actually actualize all the ideas and all the paperwork and even just simply badges from work, like the whole effort and battle it is. And for me, taking testosterone, after 3 months, I was almost looking like this. I was like, testosterone like had a big effect on me. And after 3 months, I was already feeling better in my body. Changing my name took roughly 18 months. Like it was like a year and a half of constantly every week having to think and send paperwork and like following up who did what and when, and first of all, discovering what I had to do. So I wanted to share a bit of that because I think it's a story that is not really shared. And I think it's important for people who want to design for trans and gender non-conforming folks to really get the difficulties that we already go through just to exist. So I'm French, in case some of you didn't discover that yet. So I live in the US, I live in Brooklyn, and therefore I had to change my name in 2 countries. That's what I discovered. I was like, oh, where should I start then? Should I start in the US, in France? Nobody was able to answer that question. So a good chunk of me changing my name started by like doing a ton of research and trying to make pieces together and like find what would be the best path, like changing in the US and then sending paperwork in France. Or wait, no, France and passports, then I can update my visa. But no, because I need a social security number updated with my name first. So I was like I spent a lot of weeks just trying to figure out what would be the best order to do it. And then I decided, okay, France first. And that's what's the legal way in France is like, you can ask the permission to change your name. So it's like the permission first. Let's see if we can grant you the permission to change your name. And for that, you need to bring and come up with a legitimate reason. Legitimate reason is so vague. So that's what I was working with. First, I was outraged that I had to ask the permission. I think it's like I was already so much power over my head of like, this is my name, this is me, I should be able to decide who I want to be called. And on the website of the French government, they listed a list of papers to show that I had a legitimate interest on my request. So me saying, hey, my name is Max is not enough. I had to like prove a lot of things. And one of them was certificates from relatives. Certificates from relatives. And I looked at that and I'm like, what? And that was literally my face. Like, relatives? Like what people should say, what? So let's start from scratch here. Someone in the French government made a list of stuff that someone should prove in order to change the name. So that's just a line, a text somewhere. For me, in my real life, that meant this. That meant for like 6 months, I had to annoy all my friends, and some of us are on the call now, to ask them to write a testimonial that I was presenting masculine enough to have the right to change my name. And that brought us so much, like, me, I had to actually ask them to be really strong in the masculine part, even though I identify as non-binary. I use they, them pronouns, but I had to like lie to make sure that the French government would give me the permission to be named Max. So that's the day before going to the French embassy in the US. I lay down on the floor all the letters from those friends and relatives, and the amount of energy and time I used for that was like sending emails, asking if someone could do it for me. And it was already so not, like it was horrendous, just asking someone, can you take the time to write why I have the right to change my name, please? And sign it and send it by mail, because I'm gonna have to bring the original to the French embassy when they decide I can come. And the number of follow-up I had to do, and people like, which page should I sign on, or which one? Like, it took me like, it was a full-time job just to try to gather those letters. So at the end of the day, I had 50 letters, and I was disgusted by the process. But that night I laid down all those letters, and for me it was like, okay, those are love letters. That's people who actually are behind me, supporting me to change my name. I should not have to go through this, but I have to also like witness the beauty of what's happening. People were like sending me letters on letters to make sure I had enough for my appointment. So by September, I emailed the French embassy, and I told them, I have all the paperwork. When can I come? They had no phone number. They clearly said on their website that they cannot answer the phone. It's only by email. And it's not the embassy in New York. That would be too easy. The French embassy in New York only do some basic administrative stuff, but to change the name, you have to go to the French embassy in DC, in Washington, DC. So I emailed them in September asking for an appointment, and I re-emailed them back in October, November, December, no answer, not even like a receiver, like, we have your question, we will get back to you, nothing. And in January, I received an answer, hey, great, you can come on February 7th. Okay, at 9 a.m. Okay. So I was like, okay, good. And I was like, I cannot spend money for the hotel. I live in New York. What? So I actually, I took a train at 3 a.m. from Penn Station, I think that was Penn Station, to DC, and took an Uber to the French embassy and arrived. And this is an embassy. That means like it's a consulate. I mean, I had to let my backpack with my laptop in a locker, go through their metal detector and everything. And I just had my folder with all my proof and my relatives letters. And then I said hi to the person who was taking care of my case. And she looked at all the paper and she's like, oh, but you don't seem to have the form so-and-so. And like, which form? Oh, that's okay. I can send you the link and you print it at home and you come back another day. That was my face. I was not okay. I was going to kill someone. It was like, no, I'm not going back to, I'm not going back to Brooklyn. I'm here. Like, this is already so not okay as a process. That's the picture I shot on my story on Instagram. And I was like, I was really like, I was trying to use humor, but inside I was just like, I was scared. I was scared that I would never be able to use my name. Like this whole process was like destroying myself. So I was able to breathe in, breathe out, and like look at her in the eye and say, okay, I understand that. The thing is, I'm not going back to New York now. We're both adults, we're gonna find a solution to solve that problem. I don't have my computer because it's in the locker out of the embassy, but I have my phone. So please send me the link to the form. I'll answer it and I'll send back to you so you can print it. And she was like, really? I don't think this is, and I'm like, this is what's going to happen because I'm not going back to New York. This is now. So that was a horrible day, but I was able to go through it. And what I understand from talking with that person is like, I was the first and only French citizen asking to change their name ever at that embassy. So nobody knew what was going to happen and who should do what. And they were like, it was a mess. So when I left, it has a lot of more details of the process, but when I left, I realized that I was not even sure that someone gonna do something. Like there was no process in place. There was nothing. I didn't have any receipt or like something was sent and I'm gonna have an answer in 2 weeks. I knew nothing. I didn't have any phone number to follow up or check in. I only had that one email that nobody was replying, like only 4 months later. So I waited, and after like, so that was February, and around April, I got that letter from the French government that authorized me. So I was authorized to use Max, and Arno is my middle name, to use Max as my name. So I was able to make a new French passport. So then I was like, okay, nice, September to May, I have a French name change. Whew. Easy, I can go to the DMV, make a change for having my new US ID updated and done. No, that's not what happened at all. So I went to the DMV and they looked at my French order for my name change and they're like, no, we don't take that paper. And that was it. And like, what should I bring? Oh, you need a US court order for a name change. And like, that means I have to do the same thing in the US. And they're like, well, we're only allowed to take the US court order. I'm like, oh, fine. So because I'm in New York and because I'm part of the trans community, someone referred to me to the TLDF, which is a Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, where they match trans people who have, I think you have to be under certain low, you have to be low income or not too high income, and they match you with a pro bono lawyer who will take care of your case. For me, that was like saving my anxiety and saving my life, because I was, at that point, I was not ready to do again a lot of research and find out what to do on my own. I was exhausted. I was mentally exhausted, and I was hopeless. I wasn't even sure I would be able to have a new ID with my name. So I went to the lawyer. The lawyer, part of the process, because I'm still married, but I'm divorcing, I had to ask my ex-husband the permission to change my first name. Like, this was horrendous. I was like, what? So I don't even know why. I wonder if, like, because I was married as previously being a woman, if the woman have a harder time to change their name, I would be even more angry, even angrier if I discover that men don't have to ask their wife to change their name. Only, like, I don't know. That's just a big assumption. But anyway, I had to ask my husband to write a letter saying that he authorized me to change my name. And that's part of what the lawyer brought with her when we went to the US courts. And I had to present myself and be in front of the judge to like say, hey, I would like to change my name. And this is more like a process more people know from the US, which is like, I think roughly, even if I didn't have the money to pay for the lawyer, I think it's only $60 anyway. It's like, it's not a big deal, it's doable. I think I know a lot of people are doing it in the US, so it's a bit better known. So then I finally had my US court order within weeks, like not 6 months, like within weeks. And then I went back to the DMV, got my ID, went to the Social Security to have my new social. And then this is where I was able to go to the immigration services and update my visa. which was on my passport. So so from all that process, from like roughly a year and a half, starting the process of researching to having my new ID, social security, and then my visa, I lived like a year and a half with documents with both names everywhere. Like I had a mix of IDs. To this day, I still have, I think this is hilarious because I was able to change my name at the bank even before the US court order with my French paperwork. But the gas, like National Grid and Con Edison, I still have my birth name on it. Like it's longer, so like, you don't know, it's like the processes are not optimized at all. So my big takeaway here is like, for me, it seemed impossible to change my name from like the research I made, and it took a lot of energy for me to go through it. And it might seem impossible as also designer, engineers, marketing people, all the people who design products, it might seem impossible to make a better experience. But we can, like, we can shape new procedures, and as long as we understand the difficulty that certain, like some user journeys we are giving to our customers or users, some of them are actually harmful. All the process I just told you, I'm like extremely anxious now just going through it, because I remember the stress that I was on like 24/7 and spending roughly like, I don't know, I wanted to make a chart with all the time I spent, but I wasn't able to really get a clear data from myself. But I think I was spending like maybe 8 hours every week at least of like remembering what to do, doing the paperwork, calling so-and-so, making sure like this is like a full-time job, even more, and like without certainty that I was doing what was supposed to be done. And I wanted to share a quick example of sometimes we feel like it's not doable, and then we just do it, and it happens. This is like a steal from the ad from MasterCard, who released last year a product called TrueName, and it's a way for trans and gender non-conforming people to have their actual name on their credit card. So that's doable. We just have to listen and see what people are going through with their own user journeys, and having your birth name on your credit card as a trans person means that every time you make a purchase, you are at risk to be outed as a trans person in the public space. This is terrible. This is harmful. This is violent. Someone decided that this can be changed, and I actually know that person. His name is Luke, and he works for McCain. And 2 years ago, he started to move that product and make try to get MasterCard on board to do that product. And now it's on the market, and more banks are also going to implement being able to put your name on your credit card, even if it's not your legal name. So that's doable. Like, we have power, we have ways to craft better products. So I wanted to leave you with this question, like, why do we continue to make people go through harmful user journeys? And I'm thinking trans, but also food stamps. I'm thinking a lot of like minorities and underrepresented people have to go through harmful ways to get benefits. Why do we continue to make people go through harmful? I think one of the responses, like, because we don't know they go through harmful user journeys, right? And that's something we can do a better job at knowing what people are actually experimenting, feeling, going through user journeys. And please don't say because that's how we do it. That's not a good answer. Like, we are smarter than that. We can really build better products. And I want all of us to imagine that we can do better, and even more. We want to listen to people, make better products, and then test them. And that's what we're gonna hear more with Jess just after me. Back to you, Sabrina.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this. This was really great. I am trying to figure out what is the screen that I should be sharing. But in the meantime, oh, there you go. Amazing. A couple of things before I introduce Jess. Thank you for your questions on the chat. We'll be having a Q&A at the end of this, and we'll go over some of your questions. Also, thank you so much, Max, for your presentation. This was awesome. You know, so it's so good to see like how you know, we have an example of how it feels on the ground to do you know, to make these changes. So really appreciate that. Thank you. I want to introduce you now to Jess Mons. I met Jess because they released a study for D-Scout, which is the firm that they work for. And it was a study that around the gender question in forms that D-Scout has. Jess did this amazing study to try and figure out how to ask that question to their customers, and that's what we're gonna look at today. I'm super excited to see this. Take it over, Jess.
Great. Super excited to be here today. Thanks everyone for joining us. This has been such a special group. I feel really grateful to have met these three. I think, you know, for what, 3 or 4 months now, we've been Skyping for about 45 minutes every other week or so, and creating new content. And so I'm really thankful that And Partners also gave us a platform to share some of the stuff we're working on, and look forward to more of the things we'll do together. Yeah, so I wanted to ground my presentation a little bit more in a case study. So as Sabrina said, I work at D-Scout, which is a small research company. Right now I head up our BI department, but before that I was designing a lot of UX research, helping a lot of our customers run studies and analyze that with our tools. And so I've got a little bit of kind of both sides in the experience. So before I jump into what this project consisted of, I did want to just give a little bit of context around what D-Scout is. So D-Scout is a platform or a suite of tools that you can use to do remote research. That's anything from one-on-one interviews, diary studies. We have a pool of participants you can quickly recruit from. So the two worlds that kind of exist in D-Scout, we've got an app, and that's where all of our participants submit their participation to studies. And then there's an online researcher portal where researchers can design, field, analyze, recruit for their products. But this actual project lives in the participant world. So we're going to talk about kind of their experience and how we changed that. So in order to participate in a project at D-Scout, there's a profile that comes up, and there were 3 main fields that you had to fill out. It was like your first name, your zip code, and your gender. And this is what our form looked like. So pretty terrible. And you had to select these, right? So the 2 binary options, we're actually using the wrong verbiage here. We're using sex. And we knew that this was something that we really wanted to fix, but we weren't quite sure how we should go about tackling that, right? Where should we get started? So being a research firm and kind of having those tools at our fingertips, in order to kind of answer this question of what this experience should be like, we came to the conclusion, you know, that we needed to just talk to folks that this was impacting. So that's what we did. And this was an interesting recruit, right? So I identify as non-binary and trans as well. So the language and the tone was really important here. So I spent a lot of time crafting that little pink bubble because we weren't necessarily looking for someone that identified a specific way. We were looking for someone who didn't identify within the gender binary. So these are just a few terms of the words that our participants use to describe their identity, just to give you an idea of who we recruited. And we did this through, you know, I did this through some of my social media channels. We did it through our existing pool of participants. We paid for some Facebook ads. So we really tried to get, you know, as many as we could into this project. And I believe we ended up recruiting about 120 and about 70 completed. So it's a pretty big end size in terms of the studies I've seen for trans and gender non-conforming folks. I mean, a lot of times people have like very small sample sizes and then make giant assumptions based on that. So I won't go into all the details, but just to give you the overall research design, the project consisted of 4 main parts. The first one, really just, we created some space so folks could talk about their everyday experiences moving through the world outside of the gender binary and what those felt like. And then we kind of moved into the digital realm, right? So what did that look like when you translated it to apps, online platforms, social media, dating apps? What were some good and terrible experiences, and what did those incorporate? Then we basically said redesign our form. Like what would your ideal experience look like if someone is asking you about the way that you identify? And so we got some sketches, and then they were able to walk us through in a video their sketch and really give us some context for that. And then something that was really awesome about this project is that we got to take a pause in between that part 3 and part 4 and spend some time analyzing those and actually redesign our app interface. We threw together an Envision prototype, and then we launched a 4th part where we actually got to record our participants clicking through that prototype for the first time, giving us their feedback. So we basically said, we hear you, here's what we came up with based on this, tell us what we got right and what we got wrong. And then some final tweaks at the end, and that's what we launched back in September. So I want to give you just an idea of how I'm one trans person, so I want to give kind of some platform to some of the voices that were in this project, talking about kind of their everyday experiences just moving through the world.
I feel like my gender identity is not recognized or silenced pretty much constantly. The entire world is based on a binary.
I don't identify in the gender binary, and they automatically ma'amed me. And I understand it because, I'm in a female body. Like, I get that. But it definitely does not make me feel particularly seen or understood.
It was all sir, Mr., sir. Like, they used every opportunity that they had to address me in a gendered way, which was just really unnecessary.
Every time I logged into the bank, it said my old name, and this took months and months to resolve, and it was incredibly frustrating. And also just demoralizing because it meant I had to interact with another person who I didn't know about this really sensitive topic. So
it was like you could say your own gender, but you would only show up in either man or woman searches. And that doesn't work for me.
I had to choose between the fact that, no, my gender is actually not the same as my sex. I was assigned female at birth for my sex. My gender is actually not that. And so it was just the usual typical experience of not actually having an option for me.
I was unable to become employed because they have their system so thoroughly set up to not accommodate trans folks at all. It was absolutely wild, and every comment that I got from them was like this already pre-made typed response that didn't apply to anything I was saying.
So just to give you like a small taste of some of the really vulnerable and like intimate moments that our participants shared. Beyond just their firsthand stories throughout their day, I just wanted to give an idea of the other pieces of data we were able to collect. So you saw some of those videos in part 1. In part 2, we got some screenshots of like really great validating experiences online and really terrible ones. Here in part 3 are some examples of them redesigning our specific form. And then here is the Envision prototype. So we could record their voice as they clicked through it for the first time, telling us what they liked and didn't like. So we had all of this, we had 70 scouts. They went through 4 different parts, and there were multiple entries in each of these parts. So we had a ton of data to sift through. So getting from the research to actually the prototype, I kind of wanted to talk about what that process was. one thing that was great about this is that it was really a whole company effort. Like anyone who wanted to participate, I led it, but anyone who wanted to participate could help. So we had a lot of just, locking ourselves up in conference rooms, sticky notes everywhere. And we really, from the examples, experiences, and drawings, when we distilled it down, it was pretty obvious that there were some pretty concrete design principles that we could use to inform our design. I won't go into detail. Sabrina's are almost exactly like mine, and she's going to talk in detail about them next. But I did just want to talk about kind of this last section, the prototype and the feedback. So I think that this is something that should be like continually implemented and should be part of any type of redesign or anything where you're designing an experience. Being able to have that constant feedback of, is this what we wanted it to be? Especially something that correlates to, especially something that is human identities, like that is forever evolving. So our designs need to evolve as well. And so figuring out ways that we can build in a like continual feedback loop with the users that we're designing for, I think is crucial and one of the biggest parts that was most helpful to me in this. So just quickly, I wanted to show just like a really quick summary of what we did change. Before, you can see the horrendous form, and then the two afters. Not only did we, make some changes to terms, change the way that we asked the question, we made an opt-out, we gave them some information on why, but we also created a pronoun section. So that was kind of our process. I do want to note that similar to how we were talking about one journey, this was one redesign, and this worked for us for the way that we are dealing with gender identity. If you want more information about like the principles or just want to talk about maybe a situation where you're considering redesigns or how you can make something more inclusive, I would talk about this forever. So I'm not an expert by any means, but always really would love to talk about this. So yeah, that's all I have. And I'm going to pass it back to Sabrina.
Thank you. This was awesome. I was so excited to see a project like Jess's, where they actually asked almost 70 people about who are trans and gender non-conforming about this question, and it was super exciting for me to see that project when it came about. So next on, so thank you so much, Jess. Next on is me, myself, and I. I'm Sabrina Fonseca. I am Director of Design Strategy at End Partners, and I want to talk about this question. I am cisgender, but I have a lot of friends who are trans and gender non-conforming, and I always thought that what they brought to the table in terms of the questions around gender and what we should be challenging around gender was valuable, and it would be, I always thought it would be valuable for everyone who is, everyone out there, even people who are cisgender, as well as trans and gender non-conforming people. I always loved that. And I always heard from them that they struggled with whenever they were asked the question of gender, which is something that I never really thought very much about until they brought it up, like how difficult it is to answer a question like that in a form. It is mandatory. It doesn't have any other options, and you can't answer with that. You can't not answer without moving to move on. I wrote an article in 2017. There wasn't much content back then about this, based on research with a few of my friends around this topic. So it's very exciting for me to see, research projects like Jess's and others who are now, bringing up, asking more and more people and making it part of the design process to ask about this. So I'm going to go over a few design principles that I learned, and from my own research, but also from Jess's research and from others' researches. So how can we go about asking about gender? So the first principle in my first design recommendation is just don't ask. Most of the time, people ask about gender and they don't really know why they need to know gender. They think it's just something that, it will be useful at some point. But if you don't have a good reason to to ask it, just don't ask. It's just, you know, this should be the case with any form field. Secondly, if you must ask, have a good reason to ask about it and treat it like sensitive information. So remember that some people may disclose their gender, but they not be comfortable. They might be hesitant about sharing it because they don't know who else is going to see it. So try to be transparent in your form about that. This is a really good example from one medical intake form. The reason why this healthcare facility asks about gender is for health insurance purposes. Many health insurances don't include any other option for gender apart from, you know, male and female sex. So they have to describe that. They have the ability to add more gender information. But if a person would like to, they don't have to, but they also describe why this is important for them. My third recommendation is to make it, if you need to ask it, make it optional to answer. So as an example, this is the Coursera, this is a Coursera form from a while ago. It has the binary options, it has a rather not say, and it has a custom. I really love that it has a rather not say answer if someone is not feeling safe about disclosing their gender and don't want to lie about it. Design recommendation number 4. Sometimes when you're asking about gender, it's really because you want to know how to refer to a person, and those are two different questions. You can ask for pronouns instead if you are trying to figure out how to refer to people via email. That's an example from the OkCupid app, which has you know, 3 default options, and but you can also enter your own if you'd like. If you must ask, you want to be ready for a complex answer. Gender labels are ever evolving, and there's you know, there's more and more coming up, and sometimes people use combinations of those. So this design from Facebook, which is very appropriate because Facebook is a platform for self-expression. So people, you know, will, you know, it's more likely that they will feel in this environment to express very specifically what their gender is. So in this case, you can type ahead, pick a few options, you can come up with your own, you can add multiple combinations of multiple gender labels. You can do a bunch of stuff. Even if you are in different countries, you will see that, that there are labels that are culturally appropriate. Based on the country that people are coming from. And finally, design recommendation number 6, consider the ramifications. This is more complicated because it really depends on what the ramifications are for your product or your service. So in this case, OkCupid app did a wonderful job allowing people to identify their gender, offering several options, offering the ability to have someone select more than one option if they would like. You see here, the first field is their sexuality, as Max has mentioned, and this is their gender. However, after you're done with this, it will still ask you if you would like to be included on searches for men or women. So that's where the follow through doesn't really work. You have asked someone for that information, and you decided to just toss it away and not use it and still keep it within the binary. It really doesn't work out. So my recommendation is to avoid assumptions made based on gender. Usually you don't need to know. It's not really going to give you any great information, and you know, so really think about whether you should be asking that question. And if you design for gender diversity, designing for gender diversity will result in better design for everyone. And an example is the gender neutral restroom. This was something that was implemented and recommended for the purpose of including trans and gender non-conforming people. But think about the caregivers of people the opposite sex. Like say a dad of a single dad of a little girl can now take her to the bathroom and you know, help her while they're traveling or something like that, without feeling without feeling embarrassed or anything like that. So this kind of change, that kind of inclusion benefited way more people than just the trans and gender non-conforming folks. And yeah, so that's what I've got for today. Thank you so much for all of you, to all of you. We are going to jump to a few questions. We have about 12 minutes, and I'm gonna see what we have going on. I would like first, before we start answering questions, as you're going, I would like for y'all to make a pledge to do something about increasing inclusivity of gender in your life or at work, or you know, or something else. We have a few examples here, and I would love for you to share it on chat, as well as any questions that you might have to us in the next few minutes. So in the meantime, I want to see what questions we've got. So the first question I have is from Sarah, pronouns she, they, who asked about, wanted to ask Max about pronouns in France, gender neutral pronouns in France. So how to deal with languages like French where neutral pronouns don't exist?
Yeah, so there's some research to do for any type of language, and someone replied, who was that? Someone said that, yeah, we use il. So in France, the masculine pronoun is il and feminine pronoun is elle, and we merge them, it's il. So I did not invent that. Other trans communities in France came up with that. It's been used for a few years, obviously more in the trans community, queer community, than in the cis straight world. But that's something that has been created. But French is tough. It's part of those very gendered languages that everything is gender. Like a table in tab is feminine. Why? No clue. But someone decided that the table was feminine, while a canapé, a sofa, is masculine. So then the whole world is like turning into, when you conjugate with feminine word or masculine word, you don't put the same at the end of the adjective. So everything is like planned into a very binary, which is hard. When I go to France to see my family once a year, it's like, I don't know, I'm like, I can't stay more than 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, I'm like, my old queerness and transness is just like evaporating from me, and I have to go back to Brooklyn and a less gendered language. I have hope that some of the stuff might change over time.
I have something that I'd like to add to, in terms of language and pronouns. I think it's really funny in a way, because I grew up studying, I grew up speaking Chinese, and Chinese for gender pronouns, it was only added about 100 years ago in an attempt to modernize the Chinese language. They copy concepts from the Western world, such as gender pronouns. So, but even so, the sounds for he or she are exactly the same. So with that experience in mind, one thing I'm pretty sure about is that we can always learn or unlearn gender pronouns. The funniest thing is, when I first came to America, before I become a more fluent English speaker, I always mix up he and she, because in my head, it's just the same word. And now I'm forced to learn about gender pronouns. And then a couple of years later, now I'm forced to unlearn, which is a really funny thing about it. So I think like, people here like to say that it's impossible, it's always he or she, but I think until you, like Max said, it's only impossible until we start doing it. So.
Thank you, Max and Maddalena. I have another question from Claire. pronouns they, them. I did a lot of research last year about creating inclusive design and research practices, and I ran into a lot of pushback from the trans community in regards to being tokenized. I thought this was really interesting. As a trans person doing this research, I found it an incredible tough hurdle to get over. Have any of you run into an issue like this? If so, how did you deal with it? Maybe Jess could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, I had some similar pushbacks. Essentially, when I was recruiting this through my, you know, personal social media accounts and like pushing that language out there. I think that the way that I dealt with that a lot of times was trying to take a conversation off of some group online forum and really talk to the person and explain what the research was for, and really just be transparent about everything. I think the trans community or gender non-conforming community is used to having to be very defensive because like anything that we have, we fought for. And so anytime that there is someone singling us out, I think that a lot of times you jump to that defensive. Whereas if you're just trying to talk to your users about something and being open and patient and allowing them to kind of air what they're concerned about, that helped in like, I think there were like 6 or 7 folks that I talked to, and like all but 2 of them ended up participating in the study. So that was just my personal experience of trying to have a more of a direct conversation instead of, you know, sometimes the herd mentality or just, you know, the internet in general can create some hard to empathize, hard to see each other's situations.
That makes sense. Thank you, Jess. The next question we have is from Justine. I always wonder if I will miss out on something by not disclosing. Did you hear anyone bring that up in research? In my opinion, it would be great to have disclosure as to why gender is asked in the cases where it is asked to help the user decide how they should answer if they choose to.
I mean, that I jump in real quick, but that was something that came up a lot in our study about like if will my profile be seen as incomplete, right? If I opt out, and kind of as this is like a bigger conversation, but as I see research, I would love to see research, product research, market research, any type of research move away from trying to put people in these buckets of what we understand as demographics and really base it more on behavior. So like thinking about who you want to talk to based on what they do and how they move through the world and not who you think they are, right? So we have been coaching a lot of people that use our app to kind of switch that recruitment more to that angle, to where gender is kind of not even like one of those first recruiting things, right? It's not, it's like focusing first on the behavior and then just making sure you kind of have a mix of people, not first being like, oh, I want a 50-50 split of it. And you ask why, and they're like, oh, just because that's how we recruit all our studies, you know? And then the second part is that was one of the biggest things that we got great feedback on, is both on the pronouns and on the gender identity screen, there was a little, why are we asking this? So at the time of interaction, they have all the information there. And if they don't feel comfortable, they can opt out there.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is one of those examples that, like, again, it's like creating a more inclusive space for like transgender and gender non-conforming people actually benefits everybody, right? Because asking for gender in a survey to determine the accuracy or like to find patterns in a data set, it's sometimes, I would say, is as absurd as like sorting out your data by like the first alphabet of your first name. And sometimes it's just not relevant to group people by their gender. And there are a lot better factors, a lot better properties and attributes of an individual that would be more appropriate with the research that they are trying to carry through. So it's good that we're pushing back on gender, because gender simply does not make sense in a lot of cases in marketing research.
And I wanted to add on the user research, especially if you have pushback from trans or any type of like underrepresented people, and you are really trying to involve them in your study. That's amazing. But even more than doing your research with cis straight white people, we need to compensate those people like even more. Like, and I got reached out from some journalists for like what's happening now with the pandemics and how queer people communities are like doing a lot of things together, right? Trans people, whatever. And there's no compensation. It's like, I think it's time for like really, we should compensate everyone when we do any type of user research, period. But even more, like there's no other way around. Even like if you are using emotional labor from underrepresented people, they should be compensated either by like actual cash, gift cards, or using your service for free. Like there's a way to like bringing a benefit. And that should be like for sure. And if you're like a designer working in a company, that is not the case. This is one of the big advocate work that you need to raise your voice for.
I want to add to that something that Max taught me also, which might be important as you're doing research and asking trans and gender non-conforming folks to disclose about their personal struggles, especially. To make some room for making sure that they have support after they disclose, in case that disclosing triggers something difficult for them.
Yeah, that could be actual access to a therapist that you have on hand, or like just sharing at least the numbers of the Trans Lifeline or the text crisis line, stuff like that, to like have them. That you don't leave them alone with their own feelings and thoughts that you just poked at. That's not okay.
Yeah. Well, we are at time. I really appreciate all of your questions. I'm really loving the discussion that's going on the chat. That's some amazing stuff that's coming up. If you continue to have, if you have more questions, I want you to hit us up on Twitter. Or and oh wait, there's only my Twitter handle here. All right,
Sabrina, can we save the chat and we can also send an email with answers?
Yeah, so we will follow up with any of you who might have unanswered questions. And wait, where is that? Sorry guys, trying to find. Okay, I found it. And so yeah, so hit us up on Twitter. We will email you with the link to this talk when it's published, as well as the articles that are coming up with everybody's journey. And anything else folks want to share before we go?
No, if someone wants to share on the chat before we close, like be one word, like how you feel and how you feel after this 1 hour and a half with us. Me, I feel very powerful that we did something sharing our stories, and I feel powerful. And I don't know, Jess, how are you feeling?
I feel excited. Yeah, this was really, I feel very held. This was like a very safe and like strong space. So excitement. Yeah.
Maddalena?
I'm so glad that we created this amazing space for the last 1.5 hours, talking about our experiences and sharing with our allies and with our friends and community.
Sabrina, you want to share closing and
I am really excited to see all the support for trans and gender non-conforming folks, and so much excitement around making this better and trying to make it work. Especially around the times that we are living right now, where everything seems to be about coronavirus. It's just so nice to still see that we can still have these conversations and have the support. So I really appreciate you all attending. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, and partners, for hosting. Thank you, panelists, Jess, Maddalena, and Max, for sharing your wisdom. For attending.
Yeah, if anyone wants to join us for the research for like the transgender journey map, please fill in the Google form too.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone.
A couple responses. So.
Great.
I mean, I'm going to stick around a little bit before everybody signs out.
All right, folks. Thanks so much.
Cool.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great week too. Bye.